Hi everyone, welcome to episode 69.
69? Uh-oh.
Having Fern between us.
Oh, you threw that one on me there. That was a complete surprise. We are two of the four owners of Bivouac Winery. I'm Jesse.
I'm Michelle. And this week we actually are going to be talking about oak, so we'll get into that in a little bit. But first, let's do a little check-in. We skipped over that last week because we had so much to talk about and faces to be made about tasting scotch. So thank you everyone that wrote in and told us how much you enjoy, how much I hate drinking scotch. That's fun. It was really funny. But so what's going on? How are things going?
Good on my end. How about yourself?
I'm a little bit daunted and overwhelmed by some of the projects I've got. One of those being trying to get us ready for our really big trip that's coming up. So we have to organize going to Berlin for one of my judging competitions, one of my favorites. But during the competition, Jesse and Denali will get to explore the city. And
whatever's open.
Well, actually, I just got a notification.
Yeah.
So in Berlin, you can go to shops, restaurants, museums if you have 2 vaccinations and a negative COVID test within 24 hours, or are 3 times boosted, which now all 3 of us are.
Yes.
Of course, Denali, poor thing, is sick with her booster shot. Leftover. So yeah, you guys should be, I mean, a lot changes in a month, but a lot of stuff should be accessible for you.
Oh, cool.
And then from there, we're going to Bali.
Yeah.
Whoop, whoop, which is really, really hard to go to in COVID times because they don't want anybody there on their beautiful island, and they definitely want to make sure that you leave. So that's been interesting. Visas are really hard. The whole process is blowing my mind.
A week of quarantine in a hotel, a certain sanctioned hotel.
Luckily, they're not bad hotels, but
they are expensive, especially for there.
Well, and especially for 3 of us in a room.
Yeah.
You got to kind of spring for that little extra patio space. But then we will circle back, fly back to Berlin, and train to Strasbourg, where we'll get to do a competition, one of the newest, most amazing competitions that I've been able to participate in, and Jesse may be joining me at the judging table, so that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, we'll see.
We'll see if we can get him in judging shape, right?
Even if they let me in the first day, I'm sure they won't on the second day. So I got that going for me. That's good.
And then we have a very, very special event that I am working on. More details to come on that. I'm not ready to really divulge or share, but it's a really big deal. I'm really excited, and I can't wait to tell you about it. Another thing that's happened are the kids have gone back to school here in New Mexico.
Yeah.
Of course, our daughter continues to be online, and so she right away tested out 86% of her.
Wasn't it 84?
No, it's 86. Thanks, Dad.
That's like, shade.
yeah, way to go. Like 2 points, but also whatever.
So she's almost done with math.
Oh no, she and then she
is
finished
done,
it.
But she would have taken the final like by today, but
COVID booster problems, so she'll take that tomorrow or Monday.
Under the wear. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, so she finished Algebra 2 in 1 week, is what that is. So that's amazing.
It's pretty sweet.
And so she plans on finishing all of her junior year before we leave on this vacation. And Maddox has transferred to Taos High, which is pretty exciting, where we went to school and his dad went to school, which is kind of a fun thing to watch as he assimilates into what feels like our old culture, you know?
Right. Our same old track coach and all this stuff. Like it's kind of cool.
Yeah. So I'm excited to see what comes from that and hear his stories and all of that experience. So that's pretty cool. Another thing we did was have a staff party, which is really hard to do and confusing in COVID times.
Yeah.
We managed to get enough tests so that everybody, our staff and their +1, were tested before they came inside, and everybody that we know is vaccinated anyway, but...
Worst thing to do would be to like infect everybody at your own work, not on purpose, but like by throwing, a staff party. That would have been horrible.
Right?
If we all came down to COVID and then of course can't open, and then that would cost us thousands.
Well, and oh my gosh. And
not to mention if it was worse,
And just recently, something that has come to light that I didn't realize we should be talking more about is it's not that we also don't want to get COVID like anybody else, even the Omicron that is supposed to keep you out of the hospital, but the long COVID effects of any variant can really diminish or take away your sense of smell and taste. Now for us, that means our entire business and careers are gone. So
we actually don't want it.
Yeah,
really.
If we seem hyperactive about it, it's because it would ruin our lives. So while everybody else
changed
is
dramatically.
is relaxing a little bit, and they're like, well, it's inevitable that it's gonna come, blah blah blah. No, it can't. It cannot come here.
right. Especially you in your situation.
Oof.
But Chris and I too, especially. And
of course.
And then all of us enjoy food and wine anyway. Like we don't want.
Yeah, we definitely don't. But just to mention, we're trying to be extra careful just because of that too. So now here we go. We are tasting the brand new Chardonnay. Just got released, and I don't know that you can really see this on camera, but the color is electric. It is the most incredible shade of yellow. It reminds me of
call that canary.
Canary diamond. That's exactly what I was trying to come up with.
Way.
Yes, because it sparkles. It is just luminescent. It is amazing, and that just clear tone. Oh my God, it's so pretty.
Yeah.
And so we'll talk about the flavor profile in a second, but you may also see that it is sitting in a dark bottle.
Yeah, this year the Riesling and the Chardonnay and the Gruner Veltliner are all in dark bottles. We've finally given in. I know it's the custom here in the U.S. to put it in clear bottles, but it's really better in a dark bottle, and so I'm glad we've made that switch. That's basically for protection and.
Right. Why?
It skunks it a little bit. It's the reason why like Corona beer in the clear bottles tastes skunky, but if you have it in the can, it's like a marvelous beer. Like I don't know. Wine stores, including our own tasting room, we're not as good at like keeping light away from the contents, from the bottles themselves.
Well, if it's clear glass, of course it can hit the wine itself, and even more so in the off-site sales where it's sitting in, say, a store in the refrigerated cooler with those artificial lights shining on it 100% of the time. So that is, as you know, many people try to read our newsletters and emails, and we always try to give that tip that you want to keep your wine out of the light because it damages your wine. So putting it in a dark bottle is a huge move forward in protecting the wine.
And we have not done that for the rosé because you kind of have to see the color of the rosé. I hate to say it.
People love the color.
It is a detriment still a little bit, even in that situation. But we'll see. We'll see where we evolve to anyway. But so Chardonnay.
Yes.
This is also a handwritten label. This came straight off the bottling line to my house, so I didn't. It doesn't have a label yet, but the ones at the tasting room now do.
Yes. And let's talk a little bit about why this is such a gorgeous, beautiful, amazing vintage. What did you do different?
I don't know. To me, it's our best one, don't you think?
Oh, for sure.
So,
hands down.
So this year we have the new press, and that helped quite a bit in lots of ways.
limiting oxygen, or do you attribute it to whole berry press?
One because of the other. Because we're whole berry pressing, it's less oxygen. So it shouldn't be as oxidized coming straight out of the press, which is great. And then no oak. This is the first time we've done, because we've always done like a very small amount of oak, but I've been going less and less over the years. And I think I like the no oak the best. It does have malolactic fermentation, so it does
Which
kind
you
of
can really get that creaminess.
nice and rich
Ooh.
and creamy, but it's just not, there's no oak flavors at all in there.
Which I think is kind of a fun way to start off the show, where we talk all about oak, the wine that has no oak.
Right? Yeah, you just wanted to talk about wood on the 69 episode.
Amazingly, I did not put that together, but I'm glad that you could point that out. That's really funny.
You know her, you know how you can't. She's all messed up in here.
Anyway, before we move on to your questions, it is light, bright, full of flavor, got really beautiful creamy notes. It is so beautiful. It is my new favorite on the list. So,
Now you're gonna bring
cheers.
creaminess into it.
Oh my god. Do I need to put you in a timeout? What is happening? No.
Okay.
All right, question number 1. What is the story? Oh, right. I'm sorry. I got so befuddled with Jesse. I was going to say a little bit about oak before we jumped into the questions. So for many, many, many years, amphora were the way to store wine, and as, of course, the troops were marching through different areas, they wanted to take wine with them. And the Romans found that the Gauls actually were putting beer in palm wood casks.
No way.
And not only was it much, much lighter, but there were other aspects that made it just so much easier.
Well, I would imagine a lot less fragile than a
Exactly.
clay pot. I mean,
Yes.
yeah, you break that, you lose all whatever it is, 25 gallons, or depending on the exact size. They varied because they're handmade.
Right?
Yeah.
And so they actually realized that palm wood was very difficult to bend and create the vessel they wanted. And so they discovered that oak was more malleable, which is interesting because I think of oak as one of the hardest woods.
Super hardwood, yeah.
And
She likes hardwood better than, soft pliable wood.
oh no, this is going off the rails and we aren't even halfway through. Okay, so it was also very plentiful because that was the mainstay in all the forests throughout Europe, and they also were able to determine, I think I'm good, that it also created nice flavor profiles in the wine too. So I thought that was really interesting. It also has such a tight grain that it can hold liquid really well. Of course, that's important when you're putting wine in
It
it.
takes a long time to evaporate.
Yes, and so then I found out that there are, or were, I assume that there still are, I'm sorry that I'm a little shaky on that, but there's different types of coopers, and that they started in the medieval, or that's not medieval, Roman times. God, I'm losing my shit.
Oh, no.
But so there were slack coopers that made barrels to hold dry goods.
Okay.
And then white coopers that were making buckets and tubs.
Oh.
So
Holding water.
and
Or
it's
liquids.
specifically because they use white oak, which is the tightest grain. And that's also what they use for barrel making.
I did not know it was called white oak. That's crazy.
Right? And those are called tight coopers.
Tight coopers.
Yeah, and so they make the...
I'm not going to say it this time, guys.
Oh, we're going to turn off the show. And one of the things that they realized over time is that everybody liked the taste of the wine the longer it was in the barrel. So that's a big attribute, which is really interesting. And so then we'll get into the questions. I think one of them has to do with how it's made. So
okay, in that one, I'll expound on everything you set up.
Yeah, everything you said.
I'm like, oh, man, I want to see
my
stuff.
favorite too. Okay, so what is the story with a wine aged in a whiskey barrel? What is the story? Please don't do it.
Yeah, don't do it. Probably, even though vice versa, definitely where sherry barrels have been known to be in, like last week we talked about, in Scotch making, or maybe whiskey barrels, like Scotch can be aged in whiskey barrels or sherry barrels. Madeira is made in whiskey barrels sometimes, and
Port barrels are very common.
Port barrels are really common to cross use. But whiskey and wine, I mean, all right. So oak is one of those things where you're like, it's one of the very few things that I would call flavoring a wine, even though it's not technically called flavoring a wine, but you are extracting flavors, putting them in your wine, basically. So it is a flavored wine once it's been oaked. It's the only flavoring that I condone as like serious wine. If it's a whiskey barrel wine, then you're flavoring it with not only wood, but also, whiskey flavoring, and then changing the alcohol content and stuff like that, which is, fine to play around with.
Especially
but
if you like it, keep drinking it, we're not saying anything about that,
But it's its own thing, and it's a flavored wine. It's like putting chocolate or chili or, different flavors in your wine, which is, I don't know, that's a fun thing to hang around with, but it's not like I'm not going to call that a serious wine at that point.
I totally agree with that.
And I also don't think they should be like sending flavored wines into competitions, really, because I kind of feel like, I don't know, that changes then you can just like cotton candy flavored wine, and how do you judge what's better, right?
They do get their own special treatment. They are not anywhere near the vicinity of the other wines, and you finish out. It's usually the last day, and it's the last flights, and then it's they try to keep similar fruits in the same category. And then just the really oddball, like cotton candy or something like that, into its own category. And so, our palates are really fresh for the serious light white wines. It progresses.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is definitely its own beast.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not a fan of just how intense and heavy they are. There's usually a lot of extraction. It's usually a Cabernet that is overly extracted already, and then it's put in a whiskey barrel, and then it just...
You kind of need an element of sweetness just to make it palatable.
Yeah, I almost feel like it's meant to be drank with a cigar, like something that's
gonna already
tamp down your palate, and then you need something really big.
A cigar is awesome because it makes everything taste a little sweeter,
right?
Even if it's not, and so I don't know. But anyway, what was the question originally?
Oh, what's the story with it?
What's the story with oak? Oh, with
whiskey barrels.
Yeah.
It's kind of a fad.
It's a fad. It'll come and go.
Yeah.
It'll always be here a little bit. I've had some that I've liked, but I don't buy them. But that's just me.
But if you want to try it out, give it a try. Give it a try next to a Cabernet that you really love that is aged in a French oak barrel, and see those differences. You're going to be shocked at how different they are. And of course, that's hard to do if they're different winemakers and different wineries, but
do your best.
Yeah, message me if you really want to get into the details of that, and I'll try to set something up for you. All right, how does a winemaker decide to age in French oak versus American?
Oak comes from several different places around the world. American or stateside oak, or the Americas is one place. It's a little warmer growing region and a little wetter, so they grow faster. They're mostly in forests down south, so they grow faster. They have a looser grain. so therefore you get more wood flavor more quickly. And basically, French is tighter grain, so the barrel will extract flavors for longer, but it's subtler year, say on year 1 or year 2.
And then there's Hungarian.
And Hungarian or Middle Eastern, and that's going to be kind of somewhere between. And there's a big price difference. The longer it takes the trees to grow, the more expensive they're going to be, obviously. So French oak costs upwards of $1,000, $1,200 a barrel, and American oak somewhere around $400, and Eastern European is like $500 or $600. So
that
it's a
definitely
big difference financially for what you're getting, but also I think the subtle qualities of French oak is just you get a little more vanillins and stuff like that, and less woodiness, less like chewing.
Yeah, so there's a lot of flavor profiles that come along with these different woods. As you would imagine, the same way that the same grape,
every forest has
Cabernet,
their own as well.
yeah, the same grape grown in different regions, it's going to give different profiles. So there's some amount of similarities, of course, but they really show different things. And the American oak tends to show dill and a woody kind of characteristic and more herbal kind of notes, whereas the French oak shows the, like he was saying, the vanillins, those caramel, those cinnamon, all those really luscious sweet baking spices. And then Hungarian really shows an actual spicy note, and which we don't really need because our grapes naturally have the terroir-driven spiciness.
Yeah.
And then Hungarian also has a tar component, which gives it depth. I know it sounds yucky, but it's actually really good. So all your Italian wines that you love so much, those are usually Hungarian oak. So just so you know, you like tar too. So how did you decide? Because you started off with French oak and never turned back. So that's a big commitment early on when you were on food stamps. And you said, I don't want to feed our family, let's buy barrels.
Right. I thought, well, at first I just thought better is better, and more expensive must be better. So I wanted to go try to make a name for ourselves being just better. But as I grew to know New Mexico wines in general, they are not like these big fruit bombs that can handle, probably not even Eastern European, in my opinion, Eastern European oak or Hungarian oak, and definitely can't handle American oak, in my opinion. I think that French oak is the only possible way to go with the profiles of the grapes that I see. I think it's subtle, and our flavors are a little more subtle, a little more
nuanced. Old world,
exactly.
French specifically.
So if you put your oak, your wines in American oak, I feel like it's just too much. You don't see the grape shining through as much.
Yeah.
So that's how I got to it.
Yeah. All right.
And why I'm still there.
Yeah, I think it's great.
We've never used American oak because I've just seen what it's done.
Right. It's just not the profile that you're looking for.
Yeah, exactly.
So the third question is, can you have a red wine that is never aged in oak?
You can. That's really interesting, and maybe we should. And I know, alright, so the Nouveau wines, those are all non-oaked, like Yamagata,
Nouveau.
Yeah, exactly. Light or no oaking is actually an interesting thing. There's also never mind. We'll get into that in a minute. I was gonna say there's also toasting.
When we talk about how to make a barrel, we'll get into the toasting. But
if you don't use a lot of toast and a lot of toasting in your oak, then you're just gaining a lot of different nuances and tannins that don't that you're not going to notice outright, and there are wines made.
Yeah, absolutely. In the southern part of Italy, they often don't put it in oak. The Nero d'Avolas often are not oaked, and that's one of the ones that we often enjoy.
Yeah.
And it just has so much to give, and it has a very clean finish. And for people that talk about it's not sulfites, people. If you have an issue, it's probably histamines, and oak is another histamine added into the wine, that tannin profile. And so if you can get a wine that is not aged in oak, that could help you. Also, those older oak barrels are a little bit less because they're, I don't want to use off-gassing, that's not the right word, but donating?
They've already leached. They've already leached their flavor.
Yeah.
Most of the bulk of their flavors.
Oh.
So then you're looking at a fairly unoaked wine.
All right. So then, sorry. Now the next question is about how is a barrel made, and do you make your own?
Yeah. No, it's its whole own thing.
It's an art.
It's an art done by people who want to take their fine cabinetry to the next level. Will start trying to make barrels, Cooper barrels.
I mean,
Coopers.
it's that big of a deal.
It's one of these 3 or 4 or 5 year apprenticeship programs before you become an actual Cooper. It's basically they take the staves. I mean, so they're taking very specific. If you have a cross section of a tree that you just cut down, there's certain areas, like further in, further out, what you can use for a stave of an oak barrel versus what you can use maybe for a head stave.
So just for those of you that are trying to picture this, so those strips that are curved, that are the body of the barrel,
so they go
those are
long
staves.
ways, right?
And then the caps at either end, they're flat. Those are the heads.
Yeah. Wood, head, 69, creamy. What was it? Hardwood. We're racking them up here. No, so anyway, not to make this so boring, but they can only use very specific places in the
tree column.
In the profile. I think it's mostly inner staves and blah 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 of certain age, blah blah blah. Anyway, but then when they get those out, they're whatever you call them, straight pieces. So then they have to bend them. First they age them.
Yeah.
And so they air age them almost always in stacks, and then they
like 1 to 3 years.
Yeah, 1 to 3 years.
That's a long time.
Exactly, and under certain amounts of humidity or not, outside or inside, this or that. Then they cut them into staves.
That's called seasoning, by the way.
Yes, the time they set. Then they cut them to fit, right? Depending on the pieces that they've got, and then they have to bend those. You can either bend them over flame or over steam, and then so if they're bent over flame, like you need some kind of heat source in order to bend them. Apparently, and that's why. I mean, these are hardwoods, as we've already discussed. Established. But
then you gotta get them nice and wet.
Exactly. And then you have to fit these guys all together, and then it has to equal either 125 liters or 128 or 228 liters. So it's like they're a very specific amount, and they're different thicknesses. Each of these different girthinesses. and so I mean the whole thing is just almost mind blowing.
I had no idea that this was going to become such a ridiculous show. I'm sorry, you guys. I really thought this was straightforward.
No.
But, okay.
Not with her dirty mind, it isn't.
Okay.
But anyway,
yes.
so then they bend them and put those metal rings around them so that they anyway, so and then before they put on the last end cap, they're basically making sure that it's a certain amount of toastedness. So that
like the char during
exactly.
that.
So that can be 1 millimeter, 2 millimeter, 5 millimeter thickness of char on the inside. And basically, from all those things, you get your flavor profile. The char is a major component of what you're getting. And then also...
And it's caramelizing the sugars in the oak,
Exactly.
which I think is so fascinating.
Which then leach into the wine in those ways. So something with very light char maybe tastes more coconutty, you know, and something with a heavy char obviously tastes like, you know, cigar.
Leather, some cigar box, kind of a little smokiness. And some of your wines have a heavier char versus others that I don't think people would even perceive.
We tailor it to each wine a little bit, but then it's also a time and barrel and how new is the oak and what barrels are available. And sometimes we get something slightly under oaked, and sometimes we get something more oaky than we would want it. And it's
usually with age that also
tampers.
Yeah, it dissipates a little bit, and the wine, as a wine ages in the bottle, it really changes and transforms and becomes more of a unit with that oak addition, with as the age of the
unit.
I don't know what that's supposed to mean. This flirting has gone really awry. But we don't make our own.
No,
that is an
never.
enormous, amazing artistic endeavor, and Jesse and Chris's artistic endeavor is growing amazing grapes at 6,000 feet altitude, which is insane, and making beautiful old world style wines. So
we could put up a patio maybe, but you know, fine carpentry and then super fine carpentry. I don't think so.
Yeah, so we buy the barrels and they're sent over here, and that leads us to how do you get a French oak barrel from a French forest to Dixon?
Oh wow, there's all right. So there's people that there's different cooperages, and it can either be coopered in Europe, where they cut the wood down, mill it, age it, do the whole thing, and then send over a container of a full semi-container of finished barrels, right? And you can have that shipped straight to your door. Or there's American coopers that buy French oak just in 2x4 form or whatever, 2x8 form, whatever, however it comes, and then they do the seasoning and the coopering themselves, and then they'll send that to us. So there's many, over there, and several over here that we can buy from and do. So yeah.
And just to also reiterate, one of the things that you just mentioned was how you choose different wines to be aged in different toasted barrels or not, and the vintage changes. And I think that that's an important component to learning about the skill of winemaking is you don't just put the same wine in the same type of barrel over and over and over again.
Right.
What a medium toast can do for a really big, bold wine like Aglianico is amazing, and it comes through as a support. Whereas if you put a lighter wine like a Pinot Noir in that same medium toast, you're going to miss all that delicate fruit because it's been covered up by the smokiness.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that is a big part of the winemaking process is how you order your barrels, how you have the treatment, not only just the type of oak, but then which wines you put in those, and when you decide to skip it entirely and have this glorious wine.
And then there's also traditionally before they knew that oak was the end all be all for wine, they tried all the different hardwoods. People made barrels out of cedar. People made barrels out of ash. People made and just whatever it was, oak ended up reigning supreme for the profiles. But you can still find there's such thing as giant barrels like say 1,000 or 2,000 gallon tanks that are made out of wood, and those somebody might still have one from 150 years ago that the same winery's been using, and it might be cedar. The amount of cedar flavor that's shining through, anywhere after like 6 or 8 years, you're probably not getting that much wood flavoring out of what you're doing, but you're still gaining this evaporative concentration effect, which to me is like a huge part of like why we do it. Like I like a little older oak just because I
You
feel
like older wood?
oak. I said.
Learning something about your partner.
I don't want tons of oak,
Mm-hmm.
or tons of oaky flavors. I don't want tons of smoky flavors in general. Mostly, what I'm looking for is the concentration effect. So as it evaporates out over a year, we're going to replace like 3 or 4% of that with other wine, basically. So it becomes 5 or 6 or 8% more concentrated over the 2 years that it's in a barrel, and therefore it's just more concentrated without having that much more oak. You know what I
Yes,
mean?
which is why you use old oak.
Yeah.
And so many wineries do, and that's why it's so prevalent throughout Europe as well. And we talked about that last week, that angel's share, the evaporation that condenses those flavors, and so you have to top up so it doesn't go bad.
What evaporates is pure water and alcohol, but the flavors stay in there. So when you add that next liter or 2 liters of wine every time you top up, that's that much more concentrated, that much more flavor in the same amount of volume, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So we've inundated you with a lot of information. You are welcome to follow up with more questions, and we'll answer those and help you out if you want to do a tasting at home, trying to do a comparison. Otherwise, let's come to the end. We are looking at next week. I am going to somehow, some way, get you guys a How Lily Makes Chocolates episode.
Nuh-uh.
So,
All right.
I'm not making promises that I will have her on the show, but maybe. And it could be.
Pressure's on for poor Lily.
I know. I did message her today. I was like, it could be a video, so maybe we can just see her process, because of course it's very labor intensive and takes so many steps. But we're coming up on Valentine's Day, and if you have not experienced her chocolates, then you have not had chocolate. I mean, hands down.
It's true.
And I am obsessed with chocolate. And
Unfortunately,
eat it
for the
everywhere.
rest of your lives, if you have one,
Yeah,
you're
you
gonna
can. That's
spend
it.
too much money on chocolate. But
Yeah.
whatever.
You just now have to have a monthly bill for all the chocolate that you need from Lily. And so, some way, somehow, we're going to do an episode on Lily's chocolates next week. So, thank you so much for joining us. Again, don't forget, when you buy a bottle, we plant a tree. Last week, after the whiskeys, I couldn't say that, so.
Hey, pretty good.
We will see you next week. Thank you so much, you guys. Cheers.
Cheers, y'all.